Jacinta McDonald, entrepreneur extraordinaire and mother of three, was the co-founder of Anytime Fitness in 2008, which went on to become Australia's #1 fitness chain. Jacinta has also gone on to create Urban Yoga, a brand in Sydney which she plans to expand. And when she's not doing all of those things, she's running the Humankind Foundation. The Humankind Foundation she set up in 2014, where she works with entrepreneurs and not-for-profits to bring about social change for good. Today, we're here to talk about the Humankind Foundation. Jacinta, welcome. Once you got Anytime Fitness off the ground and you've built this empire, you develop an interest in philanthropy. Tell me how that came about.
I remember attending, I think it was a growth faculty forum, and it was really in the early days of Anytime. It was probably 2 or 3 years in, and I remember hearing Muhammad Yunus speak, and he spoke about social business, and I just remember thinking it made so much sense to me that businesses could create social change. And I think that was the spark of me really starting to think about business beyond business in the way that I'd always known it. So that happened way back then, and I think I really thought about it a lot, and I'm so attracted by brands that are for purpose. So, you know, I've always followed Tom's, and I've been quite intrigued by businesses that put it at the forefront of their brand. Decided to go on a Hunger Project trip with the Business Chicks in 2014 to Malawi, and I think that's where, when you have an experience like that and you are actually sitting in a community in the middle of nowhere and looking at the issues that these amazing humans are facing, that something shifts within you to just see things in a completely different way. So for me, it was really that trip. I was lucky enough to spend most of that trip with the CEO at the time, Kathy Burke, who is an amazing human, and really started to get my head around how business could create really significant social change. So the decision to start the foundation didn't even feel like I really made one. It just happened. That was just what I was going to do from that trip, from that experience. That's what I decided that had to happen.
At what point did you think that you would start the foundation?
I think for me, there's 2 things. There's obviously raising money, and then there's raising awareness around social causes that exist. And for me, giving a philanthropic dollar to the Hunger Project would only service one need. And I don't think that is how my network sort of works. And I wanted to be, I guess, surrounded by a bunch of other entrepreneurs that are like-minded and similar to me, wanting to create a dent in the world. So for me, it was really about what I wanted to do within my business, which doesn't really serve without a foundation from a structural point of view, and then really wanting to be able to talk to that at a much larger scale than writing a check. I just think that days of writing checks I think are really limited in terms of what impact that actually has in the world. So it was a pretty easy decision for me I feel like that was my best use of my network and skills and leadership. It was to actually go down that path versus make one donation or make annual donations.
Humankind refers to itself as a disruptor brand, which is unusual in the philanthropic space. Tell me a bit about that. Why is it a disruptor brand?
I think that the way we approach it is as a business. We understand that we have to measure marketing dollars to actually gather fundraising donations with being able to service our delivery partners. But I think a lot of non-for-profits don't speak that kind of language and looking at it as really as its own commercial decision-making entity. So we really try and run it as a business. And I think that giving voice is not always what non-for-profits look for. I think a lot of it is around, we need to raise $2 million to do this, and it's not enabling people to really rally behind that and create a ripple effect. So I think that we really want to approach it that we're giving voice to things that need to be spoken about, and businesses have really loud voices within their network to be able to do that. So I think that's where we kind of sit in our own niche. There's not a lot of foundations that are structured in the way that we're structured to do that. So I think that's why it's a bit different.
Humankind values are educate, empower and equality. Why those?
Empowerment for me is probably one of the stronger of the 3 values, and because I think that any work that we support or any work that we look for in a project through Humankind is empowering the local people in their local community to make the change. It's not about ever giving a hand out. It's always about giving a hand up and allowing them to find their way to succeed in the way that they culturally would. So, and it's about empowering ourselves to actually create change and give voice two things that need to have a voice given to them. So empowerment for me is like critical. We wouldn't look at any project unless it was sustainable and creating real change. This is just not negotiable. And equality, you know, we were at an event together, you and I, the Women World Changers, and we talk about equality in terms of gender equality in Australia, and I think it's an amazing context for us to look at, and it's still an issue. But then you look at gender equality worldwide, and there's so many social issues that come from the lack of equality. So for me, it's just really looking at that as how can we actually tackle that? How can we work on that? And how can that be embedded in men and women? This is not a female issue. There's an issue for men and women to both actually attack from whether it's in Australia or whether it's in Africa in terms of how do we actually address that. And I think that it's critical for us all to thrive is to really address that.
Humankind's big goal is to play a role in ending world hunger by 2030. It's aspirational and positive, but is it really possible?
I do think it's possible because of the work that I see on the ground and the shifts that I see in communities. And I think that the way that many non-for-profits like the Hunger Project are approaching hunger and poverty, I believe it is possible. And I believe that it's so complicated, but when you break it down into different programs that can be delivered by multiple NGOs across the world, it's absolutely possible. And I think that the global goals are completely aligned to the 2030 vision of ending world hunger and poverty. So I think that the accumulation of all of that means that at least there's focus on it, but there needs to be a lot more voice around it. So I think the global goals was amazing that it happened September 15. And for me, looking at the numbers of what we're dealing with here in terms of hundreds of millions of nearly a billion people, that's where it grabs my attention in terms of this is actually something that we need to just focus on. I think that there's a lot of charities that focus on other things, and that's amazing. But for me, when you've seen it and you've been in a country and you're witnessing it firsthand, and then you look at the numbers of people living in that, for me, it's really hard for me to shift away from that. But I do think it's possible. And there are movement towards it. I mean, hunger and poverty has lessened in the last 20 years. So we are actually making traction. It's still a really big number. But I think the way that a lot of NGOs are approaching it means it is possible.
What are some of the biggest challenges that you've had to face so far with Humankind?
I think really finding that language, talking to non-for-profits and having them be able to see your vision for what you're trying to do, because it's not how they typically have operated for the last 20, 30, 50 years. It's really been about, okay, you give me money, I do that, and then you get a receipt. And I just didn't want that to be the journey of what I was doing with Humankind. So that's been really challenging, and they've been amazing to work with, but you can see them having to shift their mindset around how am I actually going to work with this entrepreneur, because we speak different languages. That's been the biggest challenge by far. Talking to other entrepreneurs about what we do, it takes 2 seconds because they're like, get it, done, understand, let's go. Whereas the other side of it has been really challenging to have a common language and have a ways of working that works for them and works for us as well. So that's been the biggest challenge.
What have been some of your proudest moments?
Taking people to Malawi on our leadership immersion trips is that's really special for me. We've got 17 people going again in March. And they have to fundraise, so they have to step into a voice of talking about hunger and poverty, which is, I love watching them do that and sort of struggle with, I have to ask people for money and I need to talk about this thing. And so I love that part of the journey. And then I love seeing them on the ground where they actually just get it. They get what they've been talking about for 6 months fundraising. So that's probably my proudest moment, is to really take people through that trip, which I think is so powerful as a leader to go through, whether it's a personal, whether it's your personal journey or whether it's a leadership journey for a business. I think that it's transformative. So that's probably my most powerful thing that we do with Humankind, is those trips.
What are the aspirations for the Humankind Project in the future?
So we're growing. I'm growing as I as I move into this space as well. So really for me, 2017 is about embedding a number of entrepreneurs into the system and really working with them to find out how I can best support them and their business to make sure that we've got a successful model, and like anything, and then once we've perfected that is really to how do we scale that to actually have a bigger impact. So for me, it's really working with a small group of entrepreneurs in 2017 around how we're helping them embed business for good, and then really looking at, okay, how big can we go with this once we feel like we've got the model right. So typical business, I guess, is how you'd look at it. So 2017 is more refining.